Okay, greetings everybody. So today we're going to focus on going through our flow sequences such as Tekken, Ma'at Ka, Sun Salutation, and others. And we're going to also talk about doing yoga for children or for youth. I call it doing yoga for youth development because we have a program coming up next week where we're going to be working with about 200 or so young people at a school out in Markham, Illinois. And so some of the people in the class today in person here are going to be some of the instructors who are going to be participating in that process. And so the first thing that I want to say about that is that when we work with young people, when we work with youth, we try to employ a concept called ISR. What does ISR mean? Internal self-regulation, okay? So internal self-regulation. And so our goal in working with children is to help them develop the ability to control their own selves, to control their own thoughts and their own behavior without the need of having outside influence, such as a disciplinarian or a teacher, to be able to do the right thing that they need to do in terms of their behavior, in terms of their life habits, and so on and so forth, based upon their own internal ability, rather than an outside force needing to impose order on them. They can find the resources from within to have the ability to control themselves, right? So we call that internal self-regulation. And so it's just another application of what we call yoga skills method, right? Utilizing the breath is always the first step in terms of creating conditions by which you are able to master yourself. How does self-mastery come about? It comes about because you are not being led by your automatic thoughts. One of the big problems that I see with this modern, post-industrial, technological, social media-driven society is that people who live in this environment, who live in this culture, who live in this society, are constantly reacting to their automatic thoughts. And they feel that their automatic thoughts are reality because they're not assessing the validity and the reliability of those thoughts. And so they have a prejudice or like a prejudice or a bias towards whatever thought comes into their mind, comes into their consciousness. They perceive that as being real, rather than seeing is this thought I'm having, is this feeling I'm having, is this emotion I'm having, does it really correspond to the reality of the situation, right? And so we are confronted with young people and adults who are driven by whatever behaviors or thoughts that are generated as a result of what? Whatever biochemicals that are created in their body, and they are created in their brain, that drives them into feelings of anger, depression, sadness, or whatever that is. So, for all thoughts that we have, there is a corresponding chemical reality that's associated with your thoughts. When you have anger, there's certain chemicals that your body produces that are consistent with anger. When you feel depressed, there are certain chemicals that your body produces that are consistent with being depressed. So the intervention that we do is the breath. Controlled, deep breathing is our intervention so that we can cut off the secretion of these chemicals. These chemicals are secreted. They're being expressed into the body through the endocrine system. The endocrine system is the system of ductless glands that are throughout your body. So on your kidneys, you have your adrenal glands, which produce adrenaline. And adrenaline is created as a response to anything that you perceive as a threat to you. So anything that makes you feel nervous, anything that makes you feel stressful, is the foundation of that feeling is the perception of threat. Okay? And so that corresponds with your adrenal glands. Your adrenal glands secrete adrenaline. Adrenaline is composed of norepinephrine and epinephrine. Those are the two aspects of adrenaline that produces your feelings, the effects that you experience as stress. And you say, oh, I have stress. I feel stress. So whether it's anger, whether it's fear, or whatever it is, it's being produced by the production of that adrenaline. So, if you want to discover the validity and reliability or the reality, the truthfulness of your feeling, is this real or is it just a misperception? Is it an exaggeration? Is it an overreaction to whatever you're experiencing? You have to dial back your body's production of that neurotransmitter. Neurotransmitter is another name for the type of chemicals that your body is producing in response to your thoughts, okay? In response to the things that you're going through. So you want to be able to slow down. That's why you hear the term count to 5 when you feel anger before you say something. Count to 5, because that counting to 5 allows you to take assessment and allows you to become aware of what's going to come out of your mouth next. Because if you don't count to 5, your next action may be, I'm going to kick your ass. You know, I hate you, or whatever, right? Because you have not taken the time to really figure out what should my appropriate response to the situation that I find myself in should be. So when we are working with children, we are working with them to help them to not react to the first thought that comes into their mind, not to react to the first emotion that comes to their mind, but to be conscious, to be aware, to be awoke, and to consciously use self-control to determine what they need to do next. So even when I have put together programs in public schools, I created a concept called discipline for disciplinarians, right? And so oftentimes, it's like we were just watching a video the other day about a cop who shot a man, a black man, for no reason. You know, and this happens all the time, right? And we know the police, you know, the whole thing with the police shooting people, we know that the foundation of that is racism, white supremacy, and so on and so forth, right? But then when you listen to the explanation of these people, you see that they are shooting people and then they're using this excuse that they was in fear of their life, right? But sometimes they may be in fear of their life. When you think about Michael Brown, right, the brother who was killed in Missouri, right? The white guy, the police said, oh, he looked like Hulk Hogan. So they have this exaggerated view of black people, you know. The guy might be the size of David, but then they say, oh, he was a big old 6'10" black man, and he was like 5'8" or something, you know. So this idea of exaggeration is present in the way that people generally operate. And so when you are a teenager or when you're an adolescent, you have these exaggerated feelings, these exaggerated perceptions of your life that are affecting you and causing you to generate certain types of neurotransmitters, certain type of chemicals into your brain, which are driving your behavior because you have not brought consciousness and awareness to your brain. That's why they have juvenile court, right? You don't take a young person to adult court. You put them in juvenile court. You don't put them in adult prison. You put them in juvenile prison because the idea of it is that their brain has not matured to the point that you can expect them to be totally present the way that a person older is. So that's why you have this separation, okay? That's why you have to meet certain age criteria. But that's the same reason why societies put young people, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, into the military because their brains are not mature enough to really understand, I do not want to be on this battlefield getting shot at and shooting at people with the misperception that I can survive because your perception is distorted that you're invincible, right? So that's why they do that. So there's a difference in the brain chemistry of young people as opposed to adults. So that's why we have to train young people to bypass that whole system that causes them to react to situations around them without thinking. Now, what I was saying about discipline for disciplinarians is that when a child would go to see the disciplinarian in school because there was some issue in the classroom, they said, go to the office. Whoever is going to deal with that person in the office had to take that child and sit down in silence with them, and both of them close their eyes and do some controlled deep breathing to lower down the intensity of their nervous system to reduce those stress-related hormones that are present in their body, which are distorting their perception of reality, right? So that disciplinarian person, that person is experiencing stress and is often reacting to the child when they come into the office from a stress reaction rather than from an understanding of the actual situation that this child is in, right? And so the same thing occurs with the cop. Not to say that they're not racist, not to say that they're not prejudiced and all that kind of stuff, right? Because they do hold those, distorted ideas and values and so on and so forth. And some of them are actually itching to shoot somebody. But then you might have other instances where the person is just out of control with this prejudice that they have in this society towards people who are not them, right? And so that person is oftentimes, so people, whether they are cops, teachers, social workers, whoever they are working with people, when you go down to the DMV, when you go down to City Hall, they have to take care, you see how people treat you. They talk to you rough and all that kind of stuff, right? All of this is stress reactions and reactions of people based upon their own prejudice, their own misperception, and those misperceptions are often the result of the fact that they are reacting toward their hormones that are being created from their perception, from their misperception of the situation, where it may be exaggerated, and then they have this exaggerated reaction, this exaggerated behavior or response to the situation that they find themselves in. So they wind up getting into a fight, they wind up getting into an argument, right? So there is an extreme need for us to understand the connection between biochemistry and behavior, and to incorporate that into our yoga practice, to understand that should be at the forefront of our consciousness when we are practicing yoga, okay? That should be in the forefront of our consciousness when we are devising programs and things for children, adults. If you're going into a situation where you're working with police officers, I've worked with police, I have worked with juvenile detention workers, I have worked with doctors, I have worked with social workers, I have worked with executives and business people, management and line staff. And so the principle of understanding the need to get these people to become aware of themselves and to practice internal self-regulation, ISR, it's the same within all those populations, okay? And the whole idea is to develop awareness in order to develop self-control. And so that's what we're working with. So when we work with the children, we're going to be working with them from the perspective of putting a series of movements and postures, a series of practices together for them that will bring them to the point where they can start to have this internal experience that makes them feel calm, that makes them feel focused, that relieves them of this ongoing feeling of stress that they may have. Once I did a TV interview, it's on YouTube now. I did it on ABC, and the woman who was talking to me, she said, "Well, why do you she said children don't have stress. But children have extreme stress. It's very hard and stressful to be growing up, regardless of what society you live in. Childhood is stressful. So children experience stress. Okay, they're trying to figure out, they're coming into the world. They only been here for a few years. They're trying to figure out, well, what is this big whole complicated morass of stuff that I have to go through, you know? And so, that's the situation that we're in. So we talk about internal self-regulation. So how do you create a series of practices that is going to meet the needs, meet the physical and psychological needs of young people, of children? The other thing that we have to think about when we're working with kids, especially kids, let's say in Chicago, or in the United States, period, in other places too. We have to be sensitive to the fact that many children have experienced abuse. Many children the abuse could be physical, the abuse could be sexual, okay? And they may have a misperception of how you touch them, where you stand when you go near them. They may have a misperception of what positions that you asking them to go into. Are you telling them to bend over? Is there somebody behind them when they're bending over? All of these things can make young people nervous. All of these things can make them feel insecure and may actually cause them to withdraw from the class or from the teachings that you're trying to give them. So when you touch them, when you say, you ask them, is it okay? Can I adjust your shoulders? Is it okay? Can I adjust your position? You ask them first. Okay, I'm going to put my hands here. And then if they say, no, don't touch me, don't touch them. But these are the things that you have to think about when you're working with all people, but working with young people in particular. If you're trying to get them to do the pyramid pose, right? The Merkut, they doing a sun salutation, and they in this position like this with their butt up in the air. Do you really want to go behind them and adjust them around their hips? So you have to think about these things. These are things you have to think about, and you have to put into your, into your teaching practices. Okay. So the other piece that we want to do is be able to take young people and give them a culturally relevant experience. So our emphasis is always that this is a yoga that your ancestors created. This is a yoga that comes from a tradition that honors you. This is not something that is foreign. We're not going to be saying, not that there's anything wrong with it, but we're not going to be saying these words that they consider to be foreign, like namaste and all that kind of stuff. Even if we use the term Hotep, we make sure we explain to them that means peace. This is a term that comes from Africa. This is an ancestral term. And then at the same time, when you're working with our young people, many of them are going to reject the idea of Africa because they're going to perceive Africa as being this place where people live in trees and are primitive and all this kind of stuff, right? Because I've had situations, where I've had, this is going back in the 70s, where I had children crying because they said, I ain't no African, because their perception of Africa is so negative, right? And so these are things that you have to think about. How can I help these children develop a positive self-image of themselves, but at the same time, not traumatizing them with reality? You are black, you are African, and black and African is beautiful. So how do you communicate that? It's not something you can just force onto them. It's not something that you can just put on them in one session. So being able to have a narrative when you're working with young people that allows them to be able to see your point without being, what's the term I'm looking for? Too harsh with them. That ain't the word. But that's part of our task. Okay? So we want our young people to feel different when we get finished. When they get finished doing their practices, we want them to say, oh, I feel so much better. Oh, bring them to a point of awareness. Do you have a headache? Did you have a headache or a stomach ache before you started? Okay, so how do you feel now? Ask questions, and be able to focus on things that you want them to become aware of, okay? So let's go into our movements and our postures now.